What would you do if the very people sworn to protect you turned their power against you, just because of the color of your skin? Imagine being a decorated US general, a woman who fought her way through prejudice and doubt, only to be dragged out of her car in handcuffs for something as small as talking back. But what those officers didn't know was who they had just humiliated, because with one phone call, one call to the Pentagon, their entire careers would crumble. How did it happen? And why did they think they could get away with it? Let's dive into this story. General Maya Johnson had built her life on discipline, resilience, and breaking barriers. The daughter of a civil rights activist, she carried herself with quiet strength, rising through the military ranks in a world where few looked like her. To her soldiers, she wasn't just a leader, she was proof that perseverance could overcome even the deepest prejudice. On this particular evening, Maya was driving home from a late meeting, still in her uniform, her medals pinned neatly to her chest. She was tired but proud, replaying the day's victories in her mind. To most people, a woman in uniform was a symbol of honor. But to the two local officers who pulled her over that night, none of that mattered. The flashing blue lights in her rearview mirror were nothing unusual until the situation shifted. At first, she thought it was a routine traffic stop, but the questions they asked, the tone they used, carried something sharper, something familiar, the edge of suspicion laced with disrespect. She tried to stay calm, answering politely, but when she dared to ask why she was being stopped in the first place, everything changed. The smirk on one officer's face said it all. He didn't care who she was, only what she looked like. What followed was not just a misunderstanding. It was a test of dignity, of authority, and of humanity, and it would push Maya to the breaking point. The officer leaned against her car door, tapping the glass with unnecessary force. "License and registration," he demanded. She handed it over calmly, her military ID visible in the stack. But instead of acknowledging her rank, his eyes narrowed. "You think wearing that uniform makes you better than the law?" Maya's chest tightened. She had dealt with subtle racism before, but this wasn't subtle. She kept her voice level. "I'm simply asking what violation I committed, officer." That single question was all it took. He pulled the door open without permission, ordering her to step out. When she hesitated, shocked more than defiant, his partner yanked her arm. Within seconds, the decorated general, who had commanded thousands of troops, was shoved against her own vehicle, wrists bound by cold steel. "Resisting arrest," the officer muttered, though she hadn't resisted at all. Passers-by slowed their cars, some recording with phones. Maya's face burned, not from guilt, but from humiliation. Here she was, a black woman who had dedicated her life to protecting freedom, being denied her own. "Do you know who I am?" she asked quietly, fighting to keep her composure. The officer sneered. "Doesn't matter. Around here, you're just another mouthy civilian." The words cut deeper than the handcuffs. She wasn't just being arrested, she was being erased, stripped of her identity, reduced to a stereotype. At the station, things only escalated. They ignored her pleas to call her superiors. They mocked her uniform. One officer even said, "Bet the Pentagon doesn't care about some woman playing soldier." That was the last straw. With steady hands, she requested her one phone call. They laughed until she made it. Because when the Pentagon answered, everything changed. The phone rang once, twice, then a commanding voice answered. "General Johnson, are you all right?" The officers froze. They hadn't expected her call to actually connect, much less to the Department of Defense. Maya's voice trembled with controlled fury. "I've been unlawfully detained. Local police have me in custody. I'm in uniform." There was silence on the line, then a clipped, firm response. "Stay calm, we're sending military police. Do not speak further to them." When she hung up, the room felt like it shifted. The officers exchanged nervous glances, their earlier confidence draining away. Minutes later, black SUVs pulled up outside the station. Military personnel stormed in, crisp uniforms and badges of authority that outranked anything in that room. The chief officer on site demanded, "Where is General Johnson?" The once smirking officers stammered excuses, claiming it was a misunderstanding, that she had been combative. But the military police weren't listening. They unlocked Maya's cuffs with reverence, saluting her as she stood tall, dignity intact despite the ordeal. And then came the words the officers would never forget. "You've just assaulted and unlawfully detained a United States general," the military police captain said coldly. "Your careers are over." In that moment, the power dynamic flipped. The men who had tried to strip her of respect now stood stripped themselves, of authority, of future, of the illusion that racism carried no consequences. The fallout was swift. Internal Affairs launched investigations, the officers were suspended without pay, and within weeks, both were dismissed from duty. Their records carried the stain of that night forever. But for General Johnson, the scars ran deeper. She had won battles overseas, but here at home she had fought a different kind of war, one against ignorance, arrogance, and prejudice. In a later interview, she didn't boast about her victory. Instead, she asked a haunting question. "If this can happen to me, a general in full uniform, what happens every day to those without the power to fight back?" Her story spread across headlines and social media, sparking conversations about racial profiling, systemic injustice, and the fragile line between authority and abuse. The image of her standing tall, saluting as her handcuffs were removed, became a symbol, not of defeat, but of resistance. And though she would carry the memory forever, she chose to use it as a weapon, not of anger, but of truth. Because change doesn't come from silence, it comes from stories like hers. So I'll leave you with this. If racism can blind someone so badly that they can't even see the stars on a general's chest, what does that say about the system we live in? And more importantly, what will we do to change it?